Some weeks feel like the ground shifts under your feet. And it's not because of a crisis, but because of a particular number, a number so large that it forces you to rethink what you thought the world was built on. And this time, that number came from Washington. $350 to $500 billion. Now, that's the figure circulating U.S. tariff negotiations with Taiwan, and investment request so oversized that it doesn't feel like a clause in a trade agreement. It feels like the rules of globalization cracking in real time. Here in Taiwan, you can almost hear the collective pause, because how do you plan around a partner who moves the goalpost this dramatically? How does any small or mid-sized economy brace for a future where the world's superpower can change the terms of engagement with a single negotiating line? When the center becomes unpredictable, you look for new centers, new anchors. And this week, those anchors weren't in Washington. They weren't even in North America. They were in Europe. You can sense it the way officials speak to each other, in the way that European leaders link their own security to the Taiwan Strait, in a way semiconductor engineers in Dresden talk about future production as if it were a shared promise, not just a project timeline. And in the way conversations in Berlin drifted towards democracy, memory, and why some partnerships feel sturdier than others. It's as if Taiwan suddenly found itself standing at a crossroad. One path shaped by uncertainty and another shaped by countries that have started seeing Taiwan not as a distant issue, but as part of their own future. And that raises the question that we'll be exploring this week. What kind of trust does Taiwan need to build, abroad and at home, to navigate a world whose center is steadily shifting? Hi, you're listening to Beyond the Reefs, a show produced by Radio Taiwan International. Here we talk about socio-economic issues that are faced by Taiwan and their broader impact around the world beyond the reefs of this island nation. Taiwan has already put real skin in the game when it comes to investing in the United States. TSMC's Arizona project alone was supposed to be a $12 billion venture. Then it became $40 billion, then $65 billion. And now the company is openly talking about long-term U.S. footprint that could reach more than $160 billion. And that's just one company. Across the board, Taiwanese businesses have steadily expanded their presence in the U.S., from electronics to manufacturing to supply chain services. By some counts, total Taiwanese investment in America has already pushed past the $90 billion mark. And that's a huge number for any economy, let alone one the size of Taiwan. So when news broke that Washington is now floating a new ask, $350 to $500 billion in additional investment as part of their tariff talks, you can imagine the reaction in Taipei. It's not shock exactly. It's more like that sinking feeling when you realize the goalposts aren't just moving, they're being rebuilt somewhere else entirely. Because at a certain point, you start to wonder, we've already committed billions, so why does it feel like the meter keeps running? Why does partnership start to feel like pressure and, I'm going to say it, extortion? Too many people watching this unfold. The request doesn't feel like normal trade bargaining. It feels like leverage. It feels like Washington knows Taiwan can't walk away from the table, and so the ask grows bigger and heavier and harder to justify. And that's the real tension underneath the headline. Not the number itself, but what it signals. If the U.S. can change the terms this dramatically, then Taiwan needs to start thinking seriously about where stability comes from and who might offer it. Which is why this week the island's attention quietly drifted west toward Europe. Starting with our first story. Foreign Minister Lin Jialong said something this week that made a lot of people sit up straighter. Europe now sees the Taiwan Strait as its problem too, not a regional flashpoint, not something far away, but a real factor in Europe's own security planning. And honestly, you can kind of see why. Russia's invasion of Ukraine shook Europe to the core. Then came Beijing's open support for Moscow. Then the image of China, Russia, and North Korea's leaders standing side by side at that September 3 parade, a photo that said more than any speech. Put all of that together, and Europe suddenly feels the world is closing in a little faster than expected. Lin described the year of unusually busy exchanges. Xiaobi Kim, the vice president in Brussels at IPAC, former President Tsai Ing-wen at the Berlin Freedom Conference, and his own 3 trips across the continent. He said European leaders increasingly see the Taiwan Strait as test case, a preview of whether democracies can still defend a rules-based order. European navies are quietly sailing across the strait more often. G7 statements now routinely mention Taiwan, and Europe, which used to keep Taiwan at arm's length, is now talking about semiconductors, AI, cybersecurity, all with a tone that sounds a lot more like partnership than just politeness. What's striking about Lin's comment isn't just the diplomacy, it's kind of the vibe shift. For years, Europe treated Taiwan like that distant cousin you see at weddings or maybe even occasional Thanksgiving dinners. Friendly, supportive, but not exactly in your inner circle. But Ukraine changed that calculus overnight. Europe learned that the hard way, that ignoring early warnings is expensive. And now when they look at Taiwan, they're not seeing faraway Asia. They're seeing a potential replay of the same playbook. Coercion, gray zone pressure, authoritarian coordination, the kind of things you don't wait to react to, you have to plan for it. And the future is, Taiwan offers something Europe needs: trust. Europe wants clean tech stacks. They want chips without political backdoors. They want supply chains that won't be weaponized. Taiwan checks all of those boxes. This is why the contrast with the US feels so sharp right now. Washington is swinging between policies. Europe, meanwhile, is trying to act like the adult in the room, steady, process-driven, and looking for real long-term partners. But let's be clear, Europe isn't replacing the US. That's not the point, and not likely. The point is that Taiwan is diversifying its bets. And Europe, almost quietly, is turning into the kind of ally that shows up not just in statements, but in actual strategy. Now in Canada, the G7 foreign ministers wrapped up their meeting and for the 4th time this year emphasized the importance of peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. And at this point, it's almost becoming like a chorus that keeps coming back because the song isn't over yet. The ministers warned against unilateral changes to the status quo, especially those done by force, which, let's be honest, is diplomatic code for China, we're watching you. They also called out China's expanding military footprint and nuclear expansion, urging Beijing to show more transparency. Foreign Minister Ling Jialong thanked the G7, calling this a sign that maintaining the status quo has basically become an international consensus. And Taiwan's Foreign Minister Lin added that these aren't just pretty words, they reflect coordinated, real-world policymaking among the world's leading democracies. And the table got even bigger this time. Canada invited Brazil, India, South Korea, Saudi Arabia, Mexico, South Korea, and Ukraine to join wider discussions on critical minerals, maritime security, economic resilience, and energy safety. So the conversation isn't just the Big Seven anymore. It's a growing group of countries who see stability in the region as part of their own security equation. The thing about the G7 is this. They don't repeat themselves for fun. If something shows up 4 times in a single year, it's because the members want that message etched into the global record. Repetition is the diplomatic version of underlying in red. And what they're underlying is that the Taiwan Strait matters. Not someday, not in theory, but right now. Part of this is the Ukraine effect. Again, the West learned its lessons. If you want to wait for the crisis to hit, it's already too late. So the G7 is choosing to speak early this time. Speak often and speak together. That's how you build deterrence without firing a single shot. What's also interesting is how many global South countries are now in the room. This isn't a quote-unquote rich democracies club anymore. Countries like India, Brazil, South Africa have their own interests: minerals, trade routes, shipping lanes, tech supply chains, and stability in Taiwan Strait affects all of that. The broader takeaway, Taiwan's security has slowly become a mainstream global issue. Something woven into conversations about minerals, shipping, energy and resilience. Not just a side note, not a special case, a core part of the world's economic engine. And you might say that this is not a good position for Taiwan, now that everybody is projecting some sort of conflict. But at the same time, I guess Taiwan is somewhat lucky to now be in the position that it's in right now after what happened between Ukraine and Russia. And that growing awareness is a form of protection in itself. Now, on the other hand, former President Tsai Ing-wen made a quiet but meaningful stop in Dresden this week, a visit to the European Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, ESMC. That's the TSMC-led joint venture that's now rising in the heart of Silicon Saxony. What began as a cautious $11 billion project in 2023 has evolved into one of Europe's biggest semiconductor bets, with TSMC partnering alongside Infineon, NXP, and Bosch. So Tsai toured the site, met engineers, and received a full briefing from project leads, including ESMC President Christian Koitz, or however you pronounce that name, and TSMC European Legal Chief Gunnar Thomas. Construction is moving on schedule, with production expected to begin in 2027. Dresden's mayor called it the city's largest ever semiconductor investment, a sign of how deeply Europe is tying its industrial future to Taiwan's technological expertise. What made the visit personal was Tsai's meeting with young Taiwanese engineers working in Germany. So she handed out Taiwan-shaped pins, told them to keep working hard abroad but never forget Taiwan, and left them with a message that felt like both encouragement and reassurance. Silicon Saxony now hosts more than 500 tech firms and research centers, and TSMC is becoming the anchor tenant in a region Europe hopes will become its own version of Hsinchu's Science Park. Now, this Dresden story is bigger than the construction site. It's about Europe making a bet and making it with Taiwan, not just on Taiwan's products, but on Taiwan's industrial culture. And that's a subtle but important shift. For years, Europe's approach to Taiwan was, send us chips, we'll handle the rest. But now, Europe wants the know-how, the reliability, the entire ecosystem. They're not asking Taiwan to ship wafers. They're asking Taiwan to help rebuild a continental industry from the ground up. And that's a level of trust the U.S. talks about a lot, but hasn't always delivered smoothly. And the symbolism of Tsai walking through that site, I say it's huge. She's the only one who pushed Taiwan's semiconductor diplomacy into high gear. She's the one who drew a clear connection between national security and industrial policy. Seeing her in Dresden feels like a full circle moment. Taiwan showing up not as a supplier, but as a co-architect of Europe's tech future. Now, this plan also diversifies Taiwan's geopolitical risks. Having fabs in Arizona is one thing. Having Europe's biggest chip cluster tied to TSMC is another. It means Taiwan's fate is now connected to more than one major power center, and in a world this unpredictable, that's not just smart policy, that's actual survival strategy, I would say. Now, from Dresden, Tsai Ing-wen traveled to Berlin, where she joined the German-Taiwan dialogue platforms on the anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, one of Europe's most symbolically loaded dates. She met with a longtime advocate for Taiwan and co-chair of the platform, and held open conversations on democracy, supply chain resilience, and the growing political risks posed by authoritarian coordination. Tsai emphasized that Europe's understanding of Taiwan has broadened. It's no longer just about chips. Europeans now see Taiwan as a partner in defending open societies, resisting disinformation, and managing technology safety. For many in the room, the parallels between Berlin's Cold War history and Taiwan's current situation were impossible to miss. The trip ended with a sense that Taiwan's story is increasingly being woven into Europe's own narrative of defending freedom. And if Dresden was about hardware and industry, Berlin is about identity, the kind of conversations countries have when they start seeing each other as fellow travelers rather than economic counterparts. So when Tsai showed up on that day, talking about Taiwan's struggles to defend its democracy under pressure, it resonated with people who grew up on the historical fault lines of the Cold War. Germany knows what it's like to live next to a powerful neighbor with very different intentions. They know exactly what it means to be split undermined, or pressured. And Taiwan doesn't need to explain that. Germans can feel it. And this is where Taiwan's diplomatic narrative is quietly evolving. It's no longer just about geopolitics. It's about shared memories, shared vulnerability, shared responsibility. And Europeans, they look at Taiwan and see a version of itself, a small democracy trying to hold the line, and that recognition builds a kind of political capital no trade deals can match. On the other hand, President Lai Ching-te rolled out a huge announcement this week. Taiwan's national health insurance budget will cross 1 trillion new Taiwan dollars next year. It's the biggest NHI expansion in the system's history, and Lai's explained it with the kind of clarity that only a former physician can pull off. Lai's background matters. Before politics, he was Dr. Lai, an NTU-trained physician, a Harvard-trained epidemiologist, and a doctor who worked the wards at Mackay Memorial General Hospital. So when he talked about medical talents leaving aging hospitals or cancer mortality, he isn't just reading a briefing. He's speaking from lived experience. The 2026 budget pushes the NHI to 988.3 billion new Taiwan dollars, plus an extra 19.9 billion new Taiwan dollars from government funding. And that money goes into better equipment, stronger training pipelines, and salaries that actually reflect workload, including different pay for different work to reward high complexity services. There's also about 48.9 billion new Taiwan dollars earmarked for cancer prevention, screenings, early detection, and a new cancer drug fund meant to dramatically cut Taiwan's cancer mortality by 2030. Lai ended on a personal note. No matter what office he holds, he still sees the world through a doctor's eyes, and that a healthy Taiwan is the foundation of a strong Taiwan. Now, this whole $1 trillion move makes more sense when you remember who Lai is at his core, a doctor who stepped into politics because of a missile crisis. That combination shapes his worldview: protect the body, protect the country, and treat both with the same seriousness. And honestly, you can feel that doctor's mindset all over this budget. Also, he's been pushing Taiwan's better health for this entire administration. So this isn't a government spending big. It's a government running preventative care on itself. And Taiwan can't keep on relying on semiconductors alone to buy global attention. The next bargaining chip has to be biotech, medical capability, and public health strength, because strong alliances aren't built on sympathy, they're built on values. And Europe, circling back to that, especially cares deeply about healthcare standards, cancer survival rates, medical ethics, and scientific collaboration. If Taiwan wants to deepen its ties there, having a world-class medical system isn't optional, it's a part of being taken seriously. So when you zoom out this week, a pattern starts to come into focus. It begins with a number so large it rattles the room, and with the realization that the old assumptions about trade alliances and stability with the US aren't as sturdy as we thought. And the moment that happens, you start looking around. You start asking, who else can understand our stakes? Who else shares our risks? Who else aren't going to take advantage of us? And that's where Europe entered the frame this week, not as a backup plan, but as a partner stepping forward at just the right moment. Europe isn't loud about it though, but you can feel the shift. The Taiwan Strait matters to them now. Our tech ecosystem matters, our democracy matters, and their actions from Berlin to Brussels to Dresden showing that they're willing to put skin in the game. And that's what the second part of this week revealed, that as Dr. Lai Ching-te pushes a $1 trillion health upgrade because he knows a healthy country earns respect. And this has been reiterated many times over and over again, that the Lai administration is planning to turn the health or biotech industries into the next quote-unquote guardian mountains of Taiwan, which is a phrase that we have used to call our semiconductors and especially companies like TSMC. Now, with birth rates dropping around the world and many first world countries turning into super-aged societies, that is an industry that could actually become the future. And I think that is the right direction to take in. Well, we will see. Make sure you join us again for Beyond the Reefs next time as we take a look at some of the socioeconomic impacts that are affecting Taiwan and other countries around the world. Thank you for listening. I'm Joey Chow, and this is Beyond the Reefs on Radio Taiwan International.